but everyone's going to groan when I say it.
Which one is it?
Orange is not the only fruit.
It's
but there's
a
a very
classic.
particular reason. I'll explain why it's so important to me. It's not just about the gay thing. So, Orange is Not the Only Fruit was the first book I read where I saw myself as one of the characters and saw my world. So if you haven't read it, it's set in a small Lancashire town in the 1970s, I think, and it's about a girl growing up realising she's a lesbian, and about her mother and the relationship between her and her mother. And her mother is part of an evangelical church, a very, very extreme evangelistic culture, a kind of non-conformist but extreme, and it really resonated for me. One, because it's about a teenage girl falling in love with another girl and going on from there. It's about the north. It's very northern. It's about northern life, and it felt like one of the first books I'd ever read. People living in a little terrace house. And although I'm not from Lancashire, we're all in the 70s, very similar. New Brighton, you know, it's a very working class little town. Felt very similar. And although my mum wasn't evangelical, she was mentally ill, and it's very hard to kind of say that about your mum, really, but I'm sort of very proud of her. She was also a survivor, but she was severely mentally ill, and she had very psychotic. She would have psychotic episodes where she thought people were going to abduct me or were influencing me in an evil way, and I'm sure that was tied up with her, the knowledge in the back of her head she would have had that I was probably gay. So, you know, she would never have said that, but I think that some of that paranoia about people abducting me and doing terrible things to me was tied up with that somewhere deep inside. And so it was very difficult, and it was a very weird way to be brought up, because you're being brought up by somebody whose vision of the world is deeply paranoid. You know, it's funny now, isn't it? The television's recording you, the radio's listening to you, the church and the gas board are working together to spy on you. So I feel like that novel, the kind of extreme treatment of the daughter by the mother, echoed something in my own life that was quite extraordinary, and it was not an experience that people were having around me. And I read that book, I was like, oh my God, that is the nearest thing I'm ever going to find to being able to, it's the nearest emotional equivalent. And Jeanette Winterson has spoken about how isolating that was. She ran away to university, and she ran away and lived in her car. Didn't she buy a car in her teens and ran away and lived in it? And just really interesting about how socially isolated she was. She went from that little town to Oxford, I think, and it was a bit of a freak out for her. And I also did something similar, but not as extreme. And I just felt like that book is my book. And even now, I've read it again since. I've read it a couple of times. I still feel like that.
Have you read Why Be Happy When You Be Normal?
Yeah.
Alongside that, right? Because I haven't actually read that part. Is that what? Yeah, I have read that. But also, just Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal. Me and my partner laugh about that, because my partner's mother is lovely now, but she went through that phase, and that kind of phrase would not be unusual. Just be normal. Just, why can't you just be normal? Why can't you just fit in? Why do you have to be different? And my mum, who's passed away now, used to talk about my sexuality as my problem. We never had an open conversation about it, and I never felt as though I wanted to. I felt as though it's mine, that's mine, not yours. I don't want to talk to you about it, really. And because of her mental illness, I think it was always going to be difficult to talk about sexuality anyway, because it was tied up with her psychosis, so a very difficult subject. Even if I'd been sleeping with men, I think it would have been really difficult. But because of the gay thing, she really hated it, and she was really homophobic. One of my friends died of HIV, and she said he deserved it because he was gay. Now, in fairness to her, about 10 years later, she apologised for saying that. So she went on a bit of a journey, because it was a terrible thing to say. But, you know, people had those beliefs that was mid-90s, so, you know, it's not that long ago. She said that. And that whole experience of those kind of northern
very closed working class communities where people had quite hard lives when they were growing up. You know, we're talking about the generation who were born in the 1930s. So had very strong views. You know, it didn't always fit in with how the society is changing. So she'd always talk about being gay as my problem. On her way of phrasing that, she said, you just want what your brother, I have an older brother, you've always just wanted what your brother has. So that's why you're interested in women. Which is quite interesting, isn't it? I wonder if it's true. I don't think it is. I think I was just born a lesbian. So, you know, that book, that extraordinary situation between the mother and the daughter, and the poor dad is just kind of pushed to one side and he's vaguely kind but a bit scared of everything, you know, that just really resonated. And it's beautifully written. I think she's a beautiful writer. I think Jeanette Winston's a wonderful writer, a wonderful raconteur, a personality, you know, and yeah, I've been to see her read here at the Blue Coat in Liverpool. Extraordinary woman. And she also gave a sermon about libraries and reading and how the government is trying to take reading off working class people, and I absolutely agree with her.
Did you use libraries as a kid?
Yeah, I grew up very near a library, beautiful Wallasey Central Library, which if you're interested in queer books, there's a great novel set in Wallasey called Sucking Sherbet Lemons by a writer called, what's his name? It'll come to me in a minute. About a character called Benson, young lad growing up gay in the 1960s in Wallasey, and there's a really great scene set in Wallasey Central Library.
Okay.
I recommend Sucking Sherbet Lemons to anyone's got a book. It's really funny.
This is 3 years worth of contributions.
Yes, and I've only looked here 3 years since then.
And where are they all from?
They're just like, you know, like you go in a cafe or an exhibition and there's a free postcard. And you think, well, that's vaguely right, call it and pick it up. Only free. Okay. I'm Steve Benson. I run LGBT groups, and I also am an independent scholar. And I read a lot of gay LGBT queer fiction. So, W.G Sebald, that way.
Yeah.
Doesn't probably come up, or might with a few people, as queer, LGBT, affirmative, gay affirmative writer, but once you've read more than 3 of his stories, you see that 80% of his narrators, which is a very complex narrative position, but 80% of them are homosexual Jewish men, mainly overtly so. You've got the weight of heterosexist, heteronormative baggage going against you about these characters can't possibly be gay, there can't possibly be any homosexuality in the books. And these characters who are marginalised because they're survivors of the concentration camps, they're marginalised, they're often called words like of the other persuasion, very old-fashioned words. He uses camp humour sometimes in some of the books. Basically, the characters in this story, which is in one of his books called The Emmigrants, which is 4 novellas. There's a gay character in the first story, and the second, and there's a gay couple in the third, and probably you could arguably the last character as well. So this is a gay couple, one with severe mental health problems, and the other, Adelvart, I think it's pronounced, is like some reference to this cloudy kind of narrator. It's all through shrouds and mists of narrative voices. But one sentence. You might say that Ambrose Adelvart, looking back, the private man, had ceased to exist, that nothing was left but his shell of decorum, which goes back to what I was talking about, the kind of chameleon and the obviously they had to live out lives which we've got no knowledge of now. Total shells, and Cosmo, I don't know if he ends up, can't remember killing himself, but he ends up in a mental health, psychiatric home. So, but at the same time, there's kind of, through the camp humour, there's kind of, as Helen Finch argues, there's kind of glimpses of a unclouded, lighter future. So I think he was quite groundbreaking Yeah, if people want to look him up on the web, you put Sebald plus gay or queer, you'll find some interesting material. I think it's that thing about the kind of occluded self we've spoken of, like the thing that when you're coming out or you're struggling to, or you're in a kind of zigzag to and forth pattern, usually when you're younger, but not always. But his characters don't really escape from that. He writes about Kafka, who is off nowadays sort of been at least bisexual, probably gay. So they're going on that kind of journey. I mean, his Mr. Kafka version thereof goes to actual nominated gay clubs in Prague and cruises a man, very overtly. So that's kind of stuff that, like I was talking about before I came out, I was having sex occasionally, liaisons, but I wouldn't have given it a name homosexual or gay or queer or anything. So they're living out these shadowy self-shadows, I suppose, shadow internalised lives. And I found that it's like the solace of melancholy, really. It's like kind of depressing, but not exactly attractive, it's not at all the appropriate word, but it's kind of haunting. He wrote a lot about decayed old buildings and everything. It's very the decay of psychogeography. So, talk about positive role models, it probably isn't it. But I think Sebald to me is the greatest writer, and I don't say that lightly, who ever existed, and I include Shakespeare. Everyone. He's a massive figure, and there's a whole industry about writing about him, but 3 people have done this, and all these books have Roger Casement, all these gay figures from the past keep appearing. It kind of angers me again, that it's been neglected, that side. So I've done lots of writing on it. So and it personally means a lot to me, because I suppose if I'd lived 50 years earlier, or even 20, that could have been me in a freaky way.
Hello?
Yeah, no, it would be actually First Lady. That's what it would be. Yeah, no, it was. Big, strong connection to Liverpool. She was born about 2 streets away from the studio. The street's not there now. I think it's a Derek Hatton housing estate. She's Liverpool. Remarkable woman, sort of lived through like a really sort of interesting time, lots of hardship and things as she was growing up, and lots of, and had to really fight, to sort of to find her identity into a certain identity at a time when there was just zero information, and how would you ever find any of this stuff out? So. That's a real good one for me. April Ashley does there's a portrait of a lady exhibition, which I picked up on the Museum of Liverpool. So I was very aware of April Ashley before that, but I'd never read her book. So I did. Got a copy then and read her book then. So obviously I've been in Liverpool for a few years by then at this stage as well. So it all really resonated with me and where I was in my own life. April's made a citizen of honour, I think, at Town Hall. She's of Liverpool for sort of various work she'd done over the years. And she was at events at Town Hall, my favourite building, and it was her 80th birthday, and it was my 40th birthday. So we were a day apart, I think, on birthdays, and she signed my book, my copy of my book for me, on my 40th birthday, on her 80th birthday, which was pretty special. So I got that nice connection. The other book I was thinking about was My Story by Caroline Cossey, which was another biography. And I think because Caroline's story sort of happened sort of 10, 15, 20 years after April, so it's more sort of in my timeline. So it was a little bit more relatable for me. And she like April really, I suppose, was, you know, sort of more kind of like a lot more binary, you know, I guess sort of more heteronormative in terms of, you know, their kind of identity, which I sort of identified as at the time. You know, I just wanted, you know, I sort of wanted to be seen as like, you know, kind of like this straight woman, you know, and like, you know, just go and have a business and into relationships and things like that. Since then, you know, it's like I realise it's a lot more complicated than that. But at the time, I think because I wanted to have some sort of clarity to my life, I think her story, she was very definite about who she was from a very young age, and she really asserted her gender identity like quite a young age, and knew who she wanted to be. She went on to become a sort of famous model, and she had lots of relationships with lots of different people. So interesting to hear her talk about her relationships, I think, and just the sort of the certainty that she had with who she was, which I didn't have. But it was nice to know that some people actually thought like that.
And as a bookshop owner, which has been the kind of more interesting or influential LGBT read for you?
Well, when I started working in the shop, it was a complete revelation to have a look at all these wonderful lesbian and gay books, and one of my favourites is Ruby Fruit Jungle. I'm afraid to say that I can't remember much about it now, but I remember reading it at the time, and it really, really empowered me, made me feel like being a lesbian isn't actually all gloom and doom. It was incredibly funny, and it was just a wow moment, because it just made me feel good as well. I was in my late 20s, because that's when I started working in the shop. I mean, I was pretty comfortable with my sexuality anyway at that time, but I just really enjoyed reading it, because that's one of the first lesbian books that I actually read. The doom and gloom was when I was first realising that I was a lesbian in my teens. Obviously I didn't know what was going on, or I kept thinking, was looking up the word lesbian in the dictionary, because I couldn't understand my feelings, because I was thinking, well, maybe I'm male. I went through a very kind of tomboyish phase, and I was just very mixed up, basically. School was pretty bad. I kept having crushes on all these girls and didn't know what to do with my feelings, so yeah, and I felt very, very guilty.
So just been asking people if they've had an influential queer book or book which has resonated with them in some way.
Yeah, so I just finished a book called Martin and John by Dale Peck.
My favourite book. And nobody knows about it. So it's like I keep on telling people that they have to read it.
Yeah, and I got that from, it's interesting because I think it was the essay you interviewed Julie, and so I got it from News from Nowhere a couple of weeks ago and finally got around to reading it. And yeah, I think I suppose like the beauty of kind of going into that place, like there's a lot of kind of like classic or kind of like a lot of kind of literature where I kind of don't feel obliged to, but I'm kind of like I want to kind of be aware of like history and kind of like influential books or books especially about kind of certain themes. It took me a while to kind of get into, and then to kind of realise what was happening in terms of like, you know, the italics versus, you know, how it was written in terms of what actually happened, and just kind of different kind of scenarios and stuff. The kind of stuff about his mother dying and just that kind of you know, like physical and verbal abuse from, was it his dad or something, like, or, you know, like a family member, that kind of resonated with me just in terms of that kind of, you know, that kind of isolation maybe that the character felt and stuff. And then just in terms of the different scenarios of you know, how he saw himself, or like him and Martin and Henry as well, and
yeah, I don't know. It did take me a while to get into, but then when I got into it, I was kind of like, yeah, and it was, I can't remember, like I had this really bad habit of kind of underlining stuff in pencil, so I think as the book went on, there was quite a few passages which I felt were really kind of useful, kind of like resonated with me. A friend of his went on holiday and we were talking about books, and he said that he read it like years ago, and he's like a lot older than me, and he was just like, oh my god, like not many people have like read that, and he was just kind of saying how, you know, when he read it at whatever age, it kind of stayed with him in the fact that kind of I wouldn't say like younger gay people, but kind of like just other people are kind of being made aware of it because it is, you know, important in terms of like literature.
Book, let me have a little think about a book. There's probably a couple of books that I've read. I think my mom definitely encouraged me to read, and my dad was a big one for like drilling in that education was important. You know, he was like, you know, you need to do this and work hard and all those kind of things. And he made it a bit more like work, you know, like get better at it and improve. Where my mom would be like, you know, just bring me to a bookshop or whatever and be like, oh, you know, pick a book, and it was a bit more about having fun and reading for enjoyment rather than reading for education purposes. I think for me, I don't know if it's weird or not, but the Roald Dahl books, I think it's not really necessarily anyone in particular. It's all of them. I think of maybe one or two that I haven't read, which are probably the more recent ones. So, and for me, that's about escapism, and it just brings me to a safe place in my childhood, I think, all those books. So, when I was younger, through primary school, I used to be a real avid reader. I used to like inhale books, and it's, I don't know about most other people, but I just don't have the time that I used to do so. And I suppose back then that included my social life, and I was reading as well. So yeah, it would be like going off, spending time on your own reading books, and those Roald Dahl books I was able to get lost in, and I loved the kind of the onomatopoeia and the words in there that were just were really funny and fun as well, and just distracted me from other things as well. So I used to reread those, I suppose, through my teenage years as well, because they were easy to read. Like as a Danny Champion of the World. I'm not too sure why that one really stuck with me, because I think other ones were kind of more fantastical and had a bit more, I don't know, a bit more, I suppose I'm into science fiction quite a lot as well, so other ones had a bit more science fiction to them as well. This one was a bit more about a relationship, and it might have been something psychological about a young boy with a relationship with his dad, and there's something in there. Don't know, psychoanalyze myself, but maybe there was something about that it was like really appealing to me. I have 4 younger brothers, so there was times when it was just a pandemonium in the house, you know, it was just blah blah blah, it was people running around and being noisy, and my mum and dad split up when I was like in my mid-teens, so obviously there was stuff going on when I was younger that I was aware of. I mean, I think most families, anyone has arguments with people, but I suppose it kind of makes sense that there was just something in the air in the house as well. So, and when I reflect, I feel like I noticed maybe I had crushes on boys at primary school as well, and that I wasn't so aware of at the time, and what those feelings were. So I think there was probably a lot of stuff going on in my mind, and being able to read focused my mind on what was in front of me, and I was able to escape into that and forget absolutely everything else that was going on around me. And books are very portable, so you can take them where you want. I used to just read in my room alone, or sometimes I'd go out and read somewhere, maybe in the back garden or something. And as I get older, I'll go and read anywhere, parks or cemeteries or wherever it's quiet, you know, wherever there aren't people to distract you really. Or the beach is a nice one as well sometimes to read it. But yeah, especially then it was more about escapism, I imagine, for myself. And the reality, also I just was loving the books. I was really enjoying them, and I was just flying through them. It was the same with the Gosebumps books, you know, with R L Stine. I think it was just like I used to fly through them, and there was lots of like series of books that I probably would just get through. You know, yeah, at the time, and like, you know, there was like book clubs in school and stuff, and I really got into all that kind of stuff. Reading was one of the first things that I really enjoyed doing in school, where other people were like, oh, this is hard work. It was like, no, give me more of this.